What's going on, guys? Welcome to Netsec Explain. And in this video, I'm going to share with you my top 10 tips for passing your OSCP. Now, before we get started, this is a video I've been wanting to make for a very long time. These tips helped me pass my first exam for both the OSCP and the OSWE, but they'll also help you during your lab time and working on the Hack the Box challenges. I've split these tips into two groups. The first 5 are going to be what to do in the exam, and the last 5 are going to be how to approach the exam. So let's go ahead, get started, and jump right in with tip number 1, set up your exam environment. And what I mean here is to set up your exam environment in a way that is comfortable for you. So for me, if you've watched a few of my videos, I usually use a Windows host with Linux VMs. So here, to show you how exactly I set up my exam environment, I have a Kali VM set up with a VPN into the Hack the Box labs. So if this wants to go ahead and open, all right. So here I just found a dummy application. I'm not going to show you how to actually hack this application. I want to show you how I set up my environment. So this is my Kali VM. This is very similar to what you'll have for your OSCP lab or your OSCP exam. But I want to be able to use stuff in my Windows host here. So the best way that I found to do that is to actually use an SSH proxy and tunnel the traffic from your VM, or I should say, tunnel the traffic from the VPN to your VM to your host machine through burp proxy. So here I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And in PuTTY, you'll want to go to SSH tunnels. And then here we can set a source port of port 8090. And we're going to add it as a dynamic port. I'm not going to go too much into the difference between the local and the remote and the dynamic ports, but dynamic port allows you to connect to anything on a remote network through the remote system. So this is something that you would use if you were going to use some sort of jump box via SSH. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to open it and I'm going to go log in. And the tunnel is created. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and open up burp. We're going to go to user options. This I'm just using the burp community version. You can do this in Pro as well. I'm going to set a SOCKS proxy. That's what this SSH tunnel is called. I'm going to set it to my local host, and then we're going to use the dynamic port that I specified, which was 8090. So I'm going to go ahead, just click on the proxy, make sure nothing is intercepting. Great. All right. And then I'm going to hop over to Firefox Developer Edition. I'm going to use Foxy Proxy to say, hey, let's use our burp settings. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn off burp settings and just try and hit this website just to show you that I don't have any tricks up my sleeve. So it's going to try for a while. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. I'm going to hop over, set this to burp, and let's go again. And here we can see that it actually connects to the remote website. And so now I can click on a couple buttons, contact us. I'm going to go back, click on news. And if I open up burp, everything's going through my burp system. And that's how I set up my environment using tunneling. For more information on SOCKS proxies and tunneling in general, check out chapter 20 in the official OSCP materials. Now, the huge benefit here is that it gives me direct access to the test systems without having to deal with the clunky VM and the restrictions that it comes with. But it's still within the rules because we're only using the approved tools within Kali. And we'll see how this kind of setup helps in the next couple of tips, which leads me to tip number 2, learn how to use Tmux or Screen. Really, it doesn't matter which. Screen is what I learned, so Screen is what I use. These apps let you emulate terminals inside of terminals, and they're really handy with SSH. When you open a Screen session, it runs in the background, so even if you disconnect, your shell is still active. This is really handy for downloading files or running large jobs that you don't want to lose if you disconnect. Here's how I used Screen during my exam. So usually I'll start with Screen and I'll give it a title. So if I'm working with multiple people, I'll add my name, or sometimes I'll just say it's the OSCP session. I can run it. I can run top in the background. But this is what a screen session looks like. If you ever have any questions or you want to see the manual, you can press Control A and then question mark, and this will give you a breakdown of all the different types of commands. So for here, I'm going to press Control A W, and we can see on the bottom that I only have one window. So on this one, I'm going to run top, just something to run in the background. I'm going to press Control A and C to create a new screen session, and I'm going to I'm just going to run a bunch of commands. Awesome. I'm going to press Control A and C again, and I'm just going to hit enter a couple times. And then to detach a screen, you can press Control A and D, but in this instance, I'm just going to go ahead and close it. So let me go ahead, click OK, and then let's reconnect. So if I had something important, it's gone now if I had a single session, but because I have a screen session, I can reattach and continue working to where I was. So in this case, I'm going to type in screen-ls to list active screen sessions, and we can see my OSCP session has been detached. So we can do screen-x to reattach, or if there were multiple screen sessions, I would say -x OSCP as just a way to identify the screen session that I was using. So here is the window that we were a part of. I'm going to press Control A and W to list out how many windows we have. So we have 3 windows total. I can press Control A and 0 to go to the first window, or the window number 0, which is where we ran top. Control A and 1 to go to the second window. And so if I have multiple things up here that I didn't want to lose, a screen session would have definitely helped me out. So how I use screen in the OSCP exam specifically was that I had a different screen session for every system. I actually had 2. So the first screen session was where I would do my Nmap so that I could run multiple Nmap scans against multiple systems and go into details with that. Second screen session is where I would have my reverse connector, right? So if I wanted to root a system or remote connect to a system, I would use a TCP callback. And so I would use netcat with the netcat-v. And so I'd have that to connect, and then I would have the other screen session to actually fire the exploit, and then I can just hop around screen sessions that way. And that's the benefits of screen. If you want to learn more, there's links to a cheat sheet for screen and a video by IppSec going over Tmux in the description below. It really doesn't matter which one you pick up. The benefit is having a terminal within a terminal and being able to have multiple windows that way. And it's very handy for SSH. Next, tip number 3, organizing your scan nodes. Now, tip 3 and 4 go hand in hand, but tip number 3 is specifically about your enumeration and scanning nodes. When you start the OSCP, the lab, or hack the box, the first thing you're going to do is run Nmap to check for open services. From there, you're probably going to run GoBuster or dirbuster on any web services you encounter. So I'm going to show you the best way that I've found to organize these nodes. And for both of these, I use Excel. While you can do the same thing in LibreOffice, Excel is the better tool in my opinion. So let's take a look at an example. Here I have a simple PowerShell window with an Nmap scan that I've already gone through. So the first thing that I want to do is take a look at my Nmap scan. And you can see that this is just a normal Nmap scan. I have multiple addresses in here with a lot of different information. But I want to be able to organize this in a way that's easier to navigate. So I have a Python script that allows me to turn a XML output from an Nmap scan into a CSV file. And then from there, we can move that into Excel and take a look at it and take a look at the results and analyze those details. So for here, I'm going to do Python 3 XML to CSV, and I have the link in the description below. We're going to use the XML output. In this case, I'm going to explain why this is second pass, but I tend to scan my systems in multiple passes or multiple phases, and so this is part of the second phase. And then I'll do CSV output. It's just output.csv. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And then I'm going to open that up in Excel. So here is just a blank Excel. And I'm going to grab that output.csv and throw it into here. So here's my CSV. I have my IP address, host name, if there's a host name associated, what operating system Nmap identified, the ports, and the services. And usually the first thing that I do is I go to Insert, Table, and then make sure the My Table has headers is checked. I go ahead and click OK. So this is part of a personal lab of mine, but here are all the addresses. I can sort by which address I want to take a look at, and I can sort by port numbers. For example, if I wanted everything that had port 80 and port 443, I could just go ahead and check that, take a look at it, and here is the list of all the systems that have port 80 and 443 open. So what I highly recommend is take a look at the OSCP lab, run an Nmap scan, and from there, import everything into a spreadsheet like this. Then you can identify specific services. So for example, if you identify like a vulnerable version of VSFTP, then that's something that you could target specifically with VSFTP attacks, things of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up another workbook, and I'm gonna show you how I map out my my web applications. So I'm actually going to just kind of use this as an example. So this is from when we connected in tip number 1. So I'm gonna go to Target. I'm gonna take a look at this 10.10.10.188, and you see that I clicked on a few things over here off to the right. So you can click on this, you can press Control A and Control C, and then you can paste it on the second row, not the first, on the second row. You'll see why. Then we can expand some of these out. And so here we have our host, our method that was used, our path. I usually delete this column. It's something that Excel doesn't really interpret well. This is the response code. This is the size. This is the file type. And I usually delete the rest of these columns. Sometimes there's a few others, but those are usually like the title, the timestamp, like it's unimportant information. And then just like the Nmap scan, I go up to Insert, Table, and then I can take Notes right here. So I can identify endpoints on the web application. I can take a look at anything that GoBuster or DirBuster spat out, and then I can just say this seems vulnerable to XXS, for example. And that's how I organize my scanning notes. For more details on my Nmap strategy, be sure to check out my video, Scanning Large-Scale Networks. The link is down below. So let's take a look at tip number 4, having a note-taking strategy. There's a lot of discussion online about whether you should use Cherry Tree or Keep Note or whatever. Honestly, the two that I use are either OneNote or a series of text files. This doesn't need to be too complicated, and asking what the best note-taking software is kind of like asking what's the best soft drink. It depends, and everybody has different ideas and opinions. For me, OneNote is fantastic, and here's why. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up OneNote, and in here, usually how I'll have it is I'll have a different notebook, or a notebook for my OSCP lab, a notebook for my OSCP, and then a notebook for my hack the box stuff. So in this case, the application we were taking a look at was 10.10.10.118, or sorry, 188. And so in here, I can easily just make some notes. This box is vulnerable to, I don't know, auth-z issues, for example. Then I can just grab it, drag and drop it wherever I want. If I wanted to grab stuff, I can just copy and paste. So I can just paste that into the notebook like so. If I wanted to take screenshots, I can use my handy dandy little snipping tool and take screenshots and then copy and paste those right into OneNote without having to worry about formatting or anything. And usually how I take screenshots is how I take screenshots is how I take a wider view of what I'm trying to look at, and then I can crop it in later because it's a lot harder to expand it out. So if you have a wider view, you can take that larger picture, you can cut it up, slice it however you need to later in your process. And then of course OneNote, all of these can be dragged, moved, done whatever with. So I find OneNote to be very versatile, and I noticed that Cherry Tree and KeepNote are a little similar, but I prefer OneNote for this. If I'm not able to use OneNote, then what I use instead is a series of text files. And what that looks like, I'm going to open up VS Code. So usually I'll start with the title. So in this case, 10.10.10, 188. And then I can put all my notes in here. So I'll create a section for my Nmap scans, and usually I'll just copy and paste it. In this case, I'm just writing things that I know. Port 80 is open, 443 is open, 22 is open. Below that, I'll usually have a section for my notes, and these are notes for myself and other things that I want to make sure get added in here. So I'll use a certain key where I'll have a star as the start of a point, and then hyphens at every subpoint and sub-subpoint beyond that. A triple star I'll use as an action item so it stands out and I know that these are things that I need to do moving forward, or these are things that I need to do to continue. And then I'll take, for the OSCP, you want to be able to get onto the system, and then you want to be able to escalate your privileges to root. So usually I'll separate my notes into just general notes on how I got onto the system, and then other notes on how to perform privilege escalation and things that I've noticed in my enumeration and footprinting and scanning phases. So yeah, it doesn't matter what note-taking software you use, just have a good strategy on how you're going to use it. If you want to use Cherry Tree, use Cherry Tree. KeepNote, use KeepNote. I also recommend Notable if you want to write in Markdown. They all get the job done. The OSCP can be such a high-stress exam that having a good note strategy will make it so much easier for you to just dump everything out of your brain and onto paper. And speaking of strategy, let's talk about how to prep for the exam, starting with tip number 5, read and reread the rules. Now, I almost failed my OSCP because I didn't pay attention to how they wanted me to take the screenshots. Turns out I took them correctly, but I was so worried about it that I didn't even want to write the report. So to save you that level of headache, let's take a quick look at their handy dandy exam guide. The first thing I want to point out to you is this big red text that says, please read this entire document carefully before beginning your exam. I saw it, I skipped it, I read through the exam guide very quickly, thought I understood what was going on, and I could have lost out on some points. So let's just take a quick look at some highlights here that I think are really important to stand out and go over. So the first one is the exam requirements. This bold text stating that the documentation requirements are very strict and failure to provide sufficient documentation will result in reduced or 0 points being awarded. This is really important to highlight. It kind of blends in, which I don't like, but definitely make sure that you document your findings and document in your report exactly how they want you to do that. And they even call out here, if any screenshots or other information is missing, you will not be allowed to send them and we will not request them. The next part that I want you to take a look at is the screenshot requirements. This is something I almost missed. Fortunately, in my process and my methodology, I do these things, and so I took the wider screenshot than the narrower screenshot, and this contained all the information that I needed. I also used the verbose flag, or -v is usually what it is in most tools, for all of my connections. So for the connect back shells with netcat, I used netcat-v, and that gave me the IP address and some other information that I needed to have in my screenshots. But in here, they want you to use ipconfig, ifconfig, or ipadder, as well as the contents of the local.txt and the proof.txt. They want it all in the same screenshot so they know that you're on the exact system that you're supposed to be on, and not on some sort of modified system that you set up to make it look like you got root access or access to whatever it is you needed. And then the final thing I want you to take a look at is the submission instructions. The submission instructions tells you exactly how they want you to format your exam report and submit it. And I hope that nobody misses points on this because they didn't submit it correctly. So definitely read and reread the submission instructions, and in general, just reread the rules before, during, and after your exam. And so those are the key things you're going to want to keep in mind. Tip number 6, practice using a solid methodology. The OSCP and Hack the Box labs are great for practicing exploitation and systems hacking, but you're going to need to approach the exam a little differently. In the labs, you'll probably spend days or a week on a single box, but in the exam, you only have a few hours. That's why it's important now to make sure that you have a solid methodology to follow. You already know you're going to need to do scanning and enumeration, so you can automate those. I used some simple Python scripts to run Nmap on all ports and do follow-up scans on certain services, like running GoBuster on web ports. Something that will help you out is imagining how you'll want to approach all 5 systems in about the same way. Scanning, enumeration, and a heavy dose of Googling. To develop your methodology, I recommend checking out some of the videos from IppSec. Honestly, just watch 5 or so videos for about 10 or 20 minutes apiece, and focus on how he approaches every system in the exact same way before he veers off into something system specific. And speaking of automation, tip number 7, learn to use scripting effectively. There's a reason the first chapter goes over shell scripting. Learn utilities like cut, sed, sort, rev, and grep with the -e flag. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show you how to use all of these here, but if you want me to make a separate video on shell scripting, let me know in the comments down below. Instead, I would point you to chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the OSCP learning materials. Try the demos on your own and practice the extra mile exercises, and practice, practice, practice. You know what? Tip number 8, practice privilege escalation. Remember, privilege escalation is about 1/3 of your exam, so practice it. 2 really handy resources that you're going to want to bookmark are GotMilk's Basic Linux Privilege Escalation and Absalom's Windows Privilege Escalation Guides. Let's take a quick look. As always, I'm going to have these links in the description below, but GotMilk's Privilege Escalation Guide, there's a few really handy tips and tools here. So in the beginning, he kind of talks about how to scan and enumerate and basically map the system that you're on, if it's a Linux system, and see what kind of services are running, seeing what permissions they're running, identify any processes that are running as root, things that you can try and explore that way, things that are in the path or a little off the path, some key areas to look for. It's a very handy guide, very thorough. Highly recommend checking it out and practicing it in Hack the Box or in the OSCP labs before you start the OSCP exam. The other one that I want you to take a look at is Absalom's security blog, which has a very similar thing to GotMilk's Basic Linux Privilege Escalation Guide, but this one's more focused on Windows. In here, it starts off with the same thing, getting system info, identifying what applications are installed on the system, seeing what other users are on the system, what processes are running by what user. Honestly, the Windows privilege escalation in the OSCP, both the lab and the exam, are pretty easy, in my opinion. But what I would say is get a little familiar with some of the Windows privilege escalation, and then from there, things will just get a lot easier for you when you actually have to exploit it on a system that you're not familiar with already. So yeah, try these out in the labs to get a feel for what works best for you. Speaking of which, tip number 9, spend most of your time in the lab. The course materials are forever, but the lab time is limited. To avoid having to buy extensions, hop into the labs right away. Try looking at some of the IppSec videos I discussed earlier, and test what you learn in the lab to do your scanning and enumeration. Definitely go through the course materials, but use them more as a reference than a guide. What I want you to avoid is buying 3 months of lab time, spending 2.5 just going through the material, and then leaving yourself only a couple weeks to practice in the labs. Also, while you're in the lab, remember you don't have to root all the boxes. If you get stuck, move to another box and come back. You're using the lab time to practice for the exam. So I'll reiterate, spend most of your time in the labs. And for the final tip, tip number 10, build a report template. When you're between the end of your lab and the day of your exam, there's just waiting. So why not use that time effectively? You should practice all the tips discussed so far, but you should also make a report template. Having a good template layout will make it easier when you're ready to write the report. Remember, you only have 24 hours after your 24-hour exam. Now's the time to prep so that when you're dead tired and mentally spent from the exam itself, you don't have to stare at a blank page for hours on end. I recommend building something simple, like the template in section 1.8. There are others online written in Markdown or LaTeX, but MS Word worked best for me. It doesn't need to be super fancy, just functional with all the necessary details. Have some tables to fill in with screenshots and descriptions, and write an executive summary. Done. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. For more information, check out the links in the description below, and leave a comment if you found these tips helpful or what videos you'd like to see next. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos like this. I'll see you next time.